To the United States next, where Donald Trump is just hours away from being sworn in as the next president of the country. On the eve of his inauguration, he held a campaign-style rally in Washington, where he repeated his pledge to begin mass deportations of undocumented migrants as soon as he's back in power. Shortly before the rally, he participated in a wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring members of the U.S. military.
A moment of reflection, a day before returning to the White House. President-elect Donald Trump, along with Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, took part in a wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, just across the river from the nation's capital. One of the several events leading up to Inauguration Day. Thousands of Trump supporters have gathered in Washington, D.C.
Trump is back! Trump is back!
Many have traveled from across the country, lining up to attend his pre-inauguration rally. While there is excitement in the air, the freezing temperatures have prompted Trump's team to move the inauguration ceremony indoors, meaning many won't get to witness it in person.
I'm here because this is the best day ever. I'm excited to see Trump back, for my kids struggling, and money's in our pocket, and I'm ready to have this world turned around.
We have tickets for outside, so inside we don't have tickets for, so we said, you know what, let's go to the rally and hopefully get a chance to see him, participate in a victory celebration.
We flew in on Thursday because we had to pick up our inauguration tickets at our congressman's office. And so now we don't have inauguration tickets because they're doing it inside. It feels awful, but happy to be here.
Trump's main message at the pre-inauguration rally? Firing up the crowd with his signature "Make America Great Again" chant.
President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
We're going to stop the invasion of our borders. We're going to reclaim our wealth. We're going to unlock the liquid gold that's right under our feet, liquid gold. We are going to make America great again.
The rally featured performances by the Village People and Lee Greenwood, both staples of Trump's 2024 campaign.
It's not the last time we're going to hear that song, I suspect. But for more on this, let's talk to DW's Pablo Foley, Elias. He's been part of our US election coverage team. You might have seen him during the US elections. Pablo, welcome.
Hi, Girish.
So what can we expect on Trump's first day? A torrent of executive orders?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I really need to stress, which I think anyone who has followed Donald Trump will know, is that we can predict the unpredictable. That's basically something we need to get used to for the next 4 years.
The defining message of this.
Absolutely. And we remember that from Trump the first time around. Now, in his victory rally, as we saw there in that report, he gave us an idea of what we can expect. So around up to around 100 executive orders are expected, ranging from one big one, immigration. We don't know exactly what that will mean, but we're expecting a lot of sort of visuals. There are millions of undocumented migrants living in the United States, obviously very worrying times for them. What will that mean for them? How will he go about? Basically, following through with a lot of what he said in the campaign trail is that he wants to deport millions of illegal immigrants in the United States. So that's one thing. He's also mentioned stuff like he said he's going to stop transgender women from competing in female sports categories. He's going to potentially pardon the January 6 rioters, which he's called hostages. He will pardon some of them. We just don't know whether it will be all of them. He's also talked about education as well, that he'll hand it back to the states, which is a big one as well, because that would then leave it up to the individual states to decide how they go about. And that would mean that there would be potentially huge differences depending on whether it's a Republican or Democratic state. And then another big one, which is cutting environmental regulations. So as you can see, a broad amount of changes are going to be coming in. I should stress as well, Barish, this is normal for a president when they come in, that they have these executive orders. What won't be, we'll say, normal perhaps, or what we've seen up until now, is perhaps the extent, the number. And also, finally, I do want to stress that executive orders can go to the courts, and the states will often then fight these as well. But in this interim period, it means that they have to deal with these executive orders and these changes.
So it's not just straightforward.
No, it's not so straightforward.
Order has been signed and then action happens.
No, well, it can happen that way, but they'll often be fought in the courts and then down to the individual states too.
Okay, stay with us, Pablo, because before returning to the White House, Trump talked about foreign policy. He made a number of bold statements as well. Let's just see what Donald Trump has said so far on the foreign policy front.
Donald Trump's second presidency will take place on a very different world stage to his last time in office, with a lineup of very different global challenges. But he's already made some ambitious promises.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and it would have never happened. It would have never, ever happened if I was there.
Trump has yet to say how he plans to end the conflict. Regardless, his presidency could have a major impact on Ukraine. He has threatened to cut US funding for Kyiv and re-evaluate America's role in NATO.
The U.S. is currently paying much more than any other nation, and that is not fair to the United States or the United States taxpayer.
Trump's grandiose approach and tendency to act impulsively marks a significant shift from Joe Biden's presidency. And his America First approach signals a major change in Washington's international agenda. Trump has said tariff is his favourite word and plans to raise taxes on imported goods, particularly from China, potentially reshaping global trade. Trump also wants to reshape international borders. He's made repeated claims about expanding US territory to include Canada and Greenland, as well as the Panama Canal. Most of Trump's plans for his second White House stint have come with very few details or explanations, creating much anticipation and apprehension about how the next 4 years will unfold.
DW's Pablo Foley Elias is with me in the studio. Pablo, foreign policy under Trump 2.0, what can we expect?
One big one, and Nita mentioned it there in the report, are tariffs, of course. The last time round we saw him impose tariffs and Joe Biden actually kept those in place. He's promised 10% tariffs on all imports and then, interestingly, 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, of course, the US's northern and southern border, and 60% tariffs on China. So the impact on that, apart from the economic impact, which is one of his big issues that he wants to improve the American economy, lower prices, is that it actually could result in consumer prices going up. And of course, relations with your northern and southern border are not exactly going to be great if you're imposing these pretty strict tariffs. And then China, of course, it's no shocker there, because he's been very vocal about these tariffs that are needed for the US economy to protect it from China.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Pablo, thanks so much for coming in.
Sure.
The effects of a second Trump presidency extend across the globe and very much here in Germany as well. His planned tariffs on European goods will impact the German economy, and his stance on NATO members' defense spending will impact German security. As Germany prepares to go to the polls on the 23rd of February, the Trump effect is front of mind among German leaders.
German politicians are bracing for the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Some of his recent comments set alarm bells ringing in Berlin. Trump already described Canada as the 51st American state and talked about taking control of Greenland. Within hours, Chancellor Scholz pushed back, using the very same words he'd previously reserved for Russia and China.
The inviolability of borders applies to every country, regardless of whether it is to the east or west of us.
There are wider concerns over Trump's take on America's allies. Just days before his re-election, he singled out Germany.
They didn't love me because I said, you got to pay, you got to pay.
Trump is threatening trade tariffs against Europe as well as China. In contrast to his predecessor, Trump sees US protection under NATO as dependent on how much allies pay. Scholz Social Democrats still hope he will change his attitude once in office.
Trump will have to understand that he will need allies.
With elections due in late February, I asked CDU leader Friedrich Merz, the man polls already see as likely next chancellor, for his message to the incoming US president.
As long as the European member states are united, they will be respected in the world, including the US. And as long as they are divided, nobody will take us serious. So this is, in my view, the last call for action.
In contrast, the far-right AfD looks like a natural Trump ally. His close advisor Elon Musk is openly calling on Germans to vote for the party. But this political liaison may eventually be overshadowed by the AfD's desire to reconnect with Russia.
It is in our interest to have, of course, a close relation with our American partners, as well as it is of huge interest of us to have a good relation to Russia as well.
Germany's Greens are determined to stand up to Trump on trade.
We can't prevent things happening by bowing down to Trump, but by making it clear to American partners that a tit-for-tat in tariffs and escalation will also hurt the American economy. Auch zum Nachteil der amerikanischen Volkswirtschaft wird.
Experts fear most that Trump could set the overall agenda.
My biggest concern is that we react too much to Donald Trump. We have to focus to strengthen the German and European economies and not so much reacting to everything he says.
But as Germany's leaders look to restore economic and political stability at home, how they navigate Donald Trump will be what most likely decides the success or failure of the next German government.
Let's get more now from the author of that report, DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner. Good morning, Michaela. Thanks for coming in. Germany is in campaign mode right now. Lots of promises are being made. Lots of things are being said. Does that give us an indication of what Germany feels, the German political establishment feels, when it comes to Trump 2.0?
Yes, I mean, no kidding. We are in the midst of an election campaign. There are elections on the 23rd of February, and our entire political team kind of swarmed out to get those reactions and expectations of what is in store when Donald Trump comes into office. And what everybody came back with is kind of reserved responses, and at the same time, we're seeing that political messaging. You can tell here the conservative camp, Friedrich Merz, trying to signal that he is open for business. He is a businessman himself. He worked for BlackRock here in Europe, and at the same time cautioning that European strength will have to be the answer. At the same time, from Olaf Scholz, the current chancellor, you're getting the message, yes, of course, Europe needs to be strong. At the same time, he's very cautionary in the kind of message he wants to spread, treading very carefully what Donald Trump could mean, knowing that really, after being the face of a failed coalition, Germans don't want to hear about the rocky road ahead. A lot of trust has been lost here in Germany as well. And I guess the honest answer is they don't know what's going to hit them first. Mm-hmm. Everybody is watching with bated breath what Donald Trump will sign with immediately after inauguration, but also will there be tariffs? That's an open question mark. Will there be a message towards Ukraine, an expectation of Europe? And that would mean Germany, as the second largest supporter, having to pick up the tap. So it's really a reaction into the unknown. And that's also something that politicians don't like to admit, particularly when they're heading to the polls.
Let's pick up the tariffs aspect here, because Donald Trump has clearly threatened tariffs. He hasn't been very specific when it comes to which countries, except for China, that he's going to impose them on. But Germany was at the receiving end of tariffs in the first Trump presidency. Has Germany prepared for this eventuality to play out potentially with Trump 2.0?
This is the thing. The short answer is no, because whoever you ask...
They've had 8 years.
Well, they will tell you that it's very difficult to prepare for something like this. But let me just counter that with a fact that also Donald Trump learned during his first presidency, which is that, for instance, BMW, the German car maker, is America's largest exporter of vehicles, because German companies are producing in the US, and they are increasingly so. And this also is partially a success now of the Biden administration. From an American perspective, through the Inflation Reduction Act, he managed to attract more businesses. So it's about creating business climate. And that's also the answer that I got from leading experts here in Germany, that creating a positive business climate will be the challenge, and not necessarily those specific tariffs. There's an expectation that Donald Trump himself will tread very carefully, because he also wants to avoid inflation that could backfire on his own economy as well, and particularly on consumer prices. And that is an expectation amongst his own electorate, that they will go down.
We'll leave it there for the moment, but thanks so much for coming into the studio. DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner. Thanks so much.
Let's get more on this now from our correspondents in Ukraine and Brussels. DW's Lucia Schulten is in Brussels, Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Nick, let's start with you. Donald Trump has chosen General Keith Kellogg as his special envoy for Ukraine. General Kellogg has raised the possibility, at least, of increasing aid for Ukraine. How likely is such a boost under Trump, and how might it influence the war?
Well, Derry, he did say, yes, that the US might increase help to Ukraine if the Russians weren't going along with talks. He equally said that if Kiev didn't show willingness to engage seriously in talks, that help could be reduced. But certainly the kind of bottom line in all this is that the people that Donald Trump has chosen for these foreign policy roles, State Department, National Security Advisor, they are all a lot more like establishment Republicans than the kind of MAGA figures that people here in Kiev were worried would take over in the second Trump administration. There's a sense that, yes, they are in a hurry. Yes, they believe that they can magically somehow, by force of their personality, convince Vladimir Putin to give away things that he hasn't offered to Joe Biden. But this is all, for now, looking less scary from a Ukrainian perspective than maybe they could have been expecting a couple of months ago.
Lucia, in light of Russia's aggression, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is pushing for a 3% defense spending target. Trump, however, is demanding that NATO members devote 5% of their GDP to defense. How is Europe responding to that demand?
Yeah, maybe to give you a bit the context of these 3% that Mark Rutte was mentioning. So he was speaking about an internal process of NATO where they're looking into what they would need to reach their goals. This is an ongoing discussion. He did say there that he thinks what would be needed would be north of 3%, but also made limitations to that this could be changed, for example, by common purchasing. So this is still an ongoing discussion. At the same time, we have heard from other NATO member states, for example, from Lithuania, that they think that these 3% should be the bottom line of the discussions. Also Finland and, for example, Estonia have been speaking out that there should be more defense spending, that NATO states should spend more of their GDP for defense in the future. At the same time, there has been, for example, also the Dutch foreign minister, Ruben Brekelmans, who has said, well, it's easy to name a percentage, but then it's maybe harder to actually reach this number in real figures to actually get there. So this is a discussion which will be ongoing, which is ongoing right now, and it is expected to take center stage, so to say, in June, when there will be a summit in The Hague where also Donald Trump is expected to come. And to give you also a bit more of a sense why it might be difficult to reach these percentage for some states, in 2024, there have been 23 member states that managed to get the current 2% mark. That also means that nearly 10 states, more concrete 9 states, did not yet reach the 2% mark, which is currently in place.
Nick, we talked about the possibility of aid being boosted to Ukraine, but it's widely feared that the U.S. under Trump will end up cutting aid to Ukraine. What would that mean, a cut? What would that mean for Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and what options would that leave President Zelensky with?
Obviously, this would be a huge blow American help is vastly bigger than the next biggest donors in Europe. In terms of military aid, Europe gives more in the way of cash to keep the government and pensions going here in Ukraine, but the military aid has been largely, the largest contributor has been the US. Having said that, it is less of a dramatic kind of perspective having that happen now than it would have been, say, a year or two ago. In the meantime, European countries that didn't have the kinds of stockpiles that the US had to just send into Ukraine have ramped up their production, are able to provide more than they were. And it has to be said that the Biden administration was preparing exactly for this. They have pushed a huge amount of equipment across the Ukrainian border in the last couple of weeks and months in the hope that it basically gives Ukraine 6 months of kind of breathing room for Donald Trump to basically meet Vladimir Putin, try out his strategy, see if he can get something out of Putin that no one else has been able to. And, in the hope that, from a Ukrainian perspective, after that kind of 6 months, that honeymoon, when Donald Trump finds out that he is unable to achieve a solution that he can sell as a success to Americans and to Ukrainians, that he then goes back to supplying Ukraine. That is the hope from here. Right now, Ukrainians don't really have many other options except hoping for that, and also hoping that Europeans make good on their promises and don't take all this kind of uncertainty as an opportunity to kind of slow down on the new promises.
Lucia, Europe is bracing for the possibility that Trump will impose tariffs on European imports and roll back environmental protections. If that happens, what response can we expect from the EU?
Yeah, so the European Union has been taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach. They have been saying, well, we will wait for what actually happens once the new Trump administration is in place. At the same time, they have been saying we want to engage with them constructively and find a solution where both of us mutually benefit. So there's still the hope that there will be room for negotiation to avoid tariffs. There could be some room, especially when it comes to gas and oil, where Donald Trump wants the European Union to purchase this from the US, that this could open up a bit of a wiggle room for negotiations. At the same time, the European Union or the European Commission, who's in charge here, has also been saying we are prepared to also defend our legitimate interests. So that means, in clear words, they're prepared to also have counter tariffs against the the United States, should the United States start doing this, but they're also saying that this would be the last resort. When it comes to the environment, there are no such tools that the European Union has, like these counter tariffs. Nevertheless, we have heard from Wouter Hoekstra, who is in charge of climate here at the European Commission, that he will do everything he can to keep on working with the US as good as possible in these areas. But there is a clear sense that it might become very difficult for global climate efforts should Donald Trump decide to step out of the Paris Climate Agreement, as he already did in his during his first administration. So there is a sense that it might become difficult here for the climate.
Lucia, Nick, thank you both very much. Our correspondents, Lucia Schulten in Brussels and Nick Connolly in Kyiv.